Hello and welcome everyone to Salesforce Women in Tech Group Kolkata. We are here with the last part of Pardot Zero to Hero workshop. This workshop has been quite successful and I'm very happy that you guys took away all the learnings from this workshop. Today will be everything related to Pardot APIs. A very quick introduction about me. My name is Khyati Mehta. I'm a proud Salesforce marketing champion. I was recently featured on Salesforce blog for my outreach work. I'm professionally working as a Salesforce developer at Cognizant Technology Solutions. I'm 4x Salesforce certified. I am a community speaker and a trailhead mentor. I also run a blog named All About Salesforce and a podcast in India named Salesforce Orbits with Khyati. We have certain contests running on. There will be a Kahoot quiz at the end of the session. So stay tuned, guys. Also, we have a contest wherein you can just tweet your heart out over LinkedIn and Twitter and tag us with Kolkata, Pardot, my name, Khyatu07, and the speaker for the day, Cruiser M, and use hashtags with Kolkata and with Pardot. You can post out your key takeaways from the session or likes or dislikes of the workshop. So a winner will be chosen at the end of the day. The agenda of the workshop is this 8-day workshop will include everything about Pardot with detailed demos wherever applicable. The workshop is planned in detailed exercise manner so that it helps Trailblazers understand everything about Pardot. We have an amazing lineup of marketing champions to cover the exercises and offer their guidance. Please note, we will not be able to provide a practice org, but we'll do our best to include detailed demos. We will also try our best to cover all the release updates for each topic. We have none other than Mike Cruiser with us. He's working as a CRM and marketing automation solution architect. He's the one who blurs the edges of what Pardot can do with Pardot APIs and custom integrations. Over to you, Mike. I think you're on mute. Mike, you're on mute yet. Mike, can you hear me? You are on mute. Oh.
Microphone array. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right. Too many options and all right. Thank you very much. So sorry for the delay. Technical issues. I had to reboot my computer this morning. I had everything all set up and then it just refused to connect the camera and the mic. So this we're going to talk about the Pardot APIs today. Kind of the brief intro. I'm not going to be able to teach programming in an hour and a half, right? But I can show you all the pieces, how to get started, where to go, and a lot of that stuff. I like more conversational. So if you notice in the middle, I have a break scheduled. So that way, you know, I'm going to have to get up like it's 7:30 in the morning. I've got my morning beverage and I'm going to have to get up. But we'll cover some questions at that point, and then carry on into the more coding thing. If you're a programmer, this might be pretty remedial for you. If this is brand new for you, you're not a programmer, we probably won't make you a programmer today, but we'll show you how to get started. So an intro into the Pardot API. First, basics. What's an API? An API is an application programming interface. It's a way computers talk to each other. You know, while they probably technically could use mice and keyboards and stuff like that, they have this protocol, this designed interface where they can talk, communicate, establish communication between each other. And it's just a documented way, a documented structure of communication. So when we're using the API, we reference the documentation for the API, and then we use that. It's usually a web-based. It's not necessarily web-based. I mean, even the mouse is actually connected to your computer through drivers, which is a form of an API and stuff like that. So there's a lot of A lot of things bolted together with APIs, but we're just going to focus on just one API for today. That's the Pardot API. So what can the Pardot API do for us? So programmers use the term CRUD, create, read, update, delete. And that's like the 4 steps of things that we can do with our API. So we can use the API to do stuff. The Pardot API, it's mostly we think about, prospects, visitor activities, custom redirects, emails. Pardot's an email tool, right? Lists, who's on this list, adding people to the list, removing people from lists, prospects from lists. And there's a lot more for the Pardot API, right? Other things we can do data imports into Pardot by API. We can do exports of the data out of Pardot by API. And then we can use the API to send email, list emails and one-to-one emails and stuff like that. There's the connections to allow us to do API sending. Looking at what the API can do us from a different lens, right? We could build integrations. We could use the Drift or qualified chatbots can integrate into Pardot. Terminus, which is a account-based marketing platform, can integrate into Pardot. Opinium, which is a Salesforce-based LMS learning management system. A Zoom, right? So when we say integrate, that means they exchange information. Somebody doing in one tool can affect what we want to do in Pardot. So in this case, the Drift can send the chat conversations into Pardot, and now we can react in Pardot by email to something that was communicated to in Drift. Kind of a neat thing is the Drift chatbot can actually take that email address and cookie convert our prospects in Pardot. So the Pardot prospects don't even need to fill out a form. They could just provide their email address on Drift, and Drift will do that conversion for us. The Zoom integration. There's a built-in Zoom integration, native Zoom integration, which I'm not a fan of. I've worked on actually a third-party Zoom integration, which I'm much more proud of. But we can have people fill out Pardot forms on Pardot landing pages and then create that Zoom registration. The people registered in Zoom will get a Pardot sent and tracked registration email, invite email, stuff like that, right? So integrations, we can make multiple systems work together, and we can build stuff where we're trying to have that right conversation at the right time, because bits and pieces of that conversation are happening in different tools and different places and different platforms. And by being able to get those to talk to each other, we can actually have a better, more cohesive interaction with the customer. We could also use the API for more bespoke development. So if we want to connect Pardot to our data warehouse, to be able to move Pardot data into the data warehouse, or take information from the data warehouse and move that into Pardot, we can do that with the Pardot API. Same with our business intelligence tools. Reporting, we can do, moving Pardot data into Tableau, or other reporting tools that we may have. Or we can do a little bit more, I'm trying to think of the right word, action-oriented report, where I want a report of everybody that's unsubscribed at this company or something like that, because we need to resubscribe them because they were using Barracuda as their firewall, and Barracuda decided it was just going to unsubscribe everybody from Pardot one day. And Barracuda did do that one day. We can actually create a more actionable report, just an export of data, and figure out that very thin slice of prospects that we're interested in doing something with. And we can do kind of more of an ad hoc reporting that way. Allows us to fix data. We import prospects, and we have, incorrect country. A lot of times the Salesforce standard country spelling is different than real people use. Brazilians spell Brazil with a Z and Salesforce has it with an S. And being able to do corrections like that with the API allows us to do this, either in bulk and batch form or in a much more near real-time process where the API, we have code that is like every couple of minutes asking Pardot, hey, what's new, what's changed? And then looking at those and saying, well, that's not right. Let me fix the spelling of Brazil. And then pushing that back into Pardot. And then we can also use the API for exploring. There's a few things in the data that aren't really presented to the user interface well or cleanly. And some of that data we can explore with the API. A confusing part about the Pardot APIs, since there's 3 of them right now. There's version 3, version 4, and the new version 5. Version 3 is for Salesforce org, Pardot orgs that are older than about 3 years now. When we created, before AMSIA, allow multiple prospects the same email address. Before when it was, before that event, that change in paradigm occurred, an email address was unique. So the version 3 Pardot API uses the email address as the unique identifier, which is kind of reasonable because Pardot's an email tool, and that's what we think of a unique identifier in email tools. When AMSIA came around, that email address is no longer guaranteed to be unique. So now we need to rely on CRM IDs. So really the only difference between version 3 and version 4 is when we request prospects, what our unique identifier for the prospect is. And we see this in our import wizard in the Pardot UI, matched by email address or matched by CRM ID. This is the API equivalent of that. The API version 5 is in progress right now. We're getting new capability. The Pardot API developers are adding lots of cool new capability, new features, things that we've never been able to do before. They're building that in API version 5. Version 5 will make that version 3, version 4 issue go away, and we'll use version 5 regardless of AMSIA or not AMSIA when it's fully available. The capability that we have today in version 3, version 4, the dev team's not pulling that into version 5 until last minute. They're concentrating their efforts on new capability. So the ability to add custom activities, which is a new feature in Pardot that's built on the API version 5. I'm really excited to be able to use it. It allows us to start building capability, a year ahead of when we actually get the full final version 5 update. But yeah, I like the version 5 as well. So let's explore the Pardot API. Did this change? Oh yes, perfect. So when we want to go to and look up an API, there's documentation. The Salesforce developer documentations at developer.salesforce.com. And we want to go to the Pardot section, right? So if we go to developer, we scroll through here, there's going to be in here somewhere the link to the Pardot documentation. I'm on this one so often that I let it autocomplete, right? When we first go to the API documentation, it looks like this. We see that there's, the object APIs, import, export. We get started with the guides and kind of look through it. So authentication is a big pain with the Pardot API. It's actually the biggest pain of using the API is getting authentication. We're going to dive into that here in a minute. Error codes, computer can't easily tell you what's wrong, so it gives error codes so we can look up these error codes if we have getting a response back with an error. That difference between version 3 and version 4 we discussed. When we're dealing with a fair amount of data, there's some nuance around getting tens of thousands of records out of Pardot. This bulk data pool is an older way of doing this. At this point, I use the Pardot API export, which is a fairly new, within the last year or so, capability. It's just a different way of getting this, but it's something to be aware of when we're dealing with large amounts of data. There are techniques that we want to use, such as the bulk data pool or the export. We have the versions of version 3, version 4, version 5 docs. Version 3, version 4 are going to be all about the same. Right, it's the same stuff. We can kind of go through what we're looking at. So things like accounts, right? Well, this is the Pardot account. So this will tell us by API when the account was created, what API version, and a few other things that are there. We can do email clicks, campaigns, Pardot campaigns. So Pardot campaigns uses an internal Pardot ID. It's usually 4 digits. It's not the CRM ID that we want to use, which is really confusing when we're trying to deal with Pardot with campaigns within Pardot by APIs. We want to use our connected campaign CRM IDs, and we can't use those. We have to use these numerical campaign IDs. Custom fields. This is the Pardot custom field, so we can read custom fields. We can create custom fields by program, by API. So if we want to build an integration and we want that integration just kind of automatically install itself, like I need 7 custom fields in order to do what I need to do, because that's what a Zoom integration has. We registered, attended, registered date, attended date, webinar name, link for the how to sign up to the webinar, right? We can actually use the API to check to see if those fields exist. If they don't exist, create those fields. I'm also using this custom field capability to migrate Pardot custom fields from production into Sandbox. When we spin up a new Pardot Sandbox, it's kind of like Slate, and there's no migration capability today. So I'll use this custom field API endpoint to read all the custom fields out of production and then write them into the Sandbox. So I don't have to sit for hours and recreate all these 200, 250 custom fields by hand. Custom redirects. Again, we can read custom redirects. I don't believe we can write custom redirects. So when we're looking at the documentation, we can kind of see what is available for us. So I can see I can do a read. It's in the sidebar. I can do a read, I can do a query, but I don't see create, I don't see update. So it's one of the things looking at the documentation is knowing what you can do. I can read custom redirects. I can't write or create them. Why would you want to be able to read custom redirects? That can be useful if you want to link check all of your custom redirect links to make sure they're still good and valid, because link rot exists. Dynamic content. Again, we could do that kind of the query, that read. We can see what's in the dynamic content, but we can't edit the dynamic content pieces themselves. Email templates, same thing. We could start doing read-write emails. The export capability, I use this a fair amount, especially with syncing to your data lake or an external tool. This is a new feature, so it's different than the rest of the API endpoints. You create an export, you then turn the export on and run the export, and then you go back and you check to see if the export's done, because the export can take 10-15 minutes. I've had exports take over 24 hours when I'm trying to export a large amount of data. And you basically periodically go back and check the export. And once the export's done, it tells you that it's been complete. Then you go in and you can download the export files. The files are capped at, I think, 100 megabytes each file, or 10 megabytes each file, something like that. and then you basically download each file, and then you can pull that into the computer memory and do what you need to do with it. So it's a fairly involved process to get these exports, and it's very similar with imports as well. Forms, we could just do the query and the read with the forms. Some of the stuff I don't use. Life cycle histories, life cycle stages. I've never used those by API. List memberships we'll use a fair amount. We'll use list memberships to read, is a prospect on this list? Is it not on this list? We can read dynamic lists, and we'll get prospects that have unsubscribed from the dynamic list, and it'll be like a deleted equals true flag on that. So that way we know that the dynamic list has put them on that list, but the subscriber has opted off that list. Opportunities. This gets into where the API documentation is old. So if we look at opportunities, we see that we can create, delete opportunities. This is no longer true. This was capability from back in 2013, 2012, before Salesforce bought Pardot. Pardot used to be able to connect to NetSuite, Sugar CRM, or even standalone. It's no longer the case. We have bits and pieces of old API capability still in the documentation that's not relevant today. Pardot cannot alter opportunities. That's only the CRM. But our documentation has this old endpoint details that's no longer relevant. We see that again in our prospect accounts. Accounts assign, account create, those also aren't functional anymore with Pardot connected to Salesforce CRM. Prospect, we spend a lot of time working with prospects in the API, and we notice we got a lot of different capability here. We can assign unassigned prospects by API. Normal Pardot to Salesforce rules apply here. If the prospect is already assigned in the CRM, we can ask Pardot to assign it. It's not gonna change that assignment, that record ownership. Unassign, another vestigial command that does not make sense with Salesforce CRM. Batch create, batch update. Again, this is dealing with creating larger numbers of records, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. The batch create, batch update, batch upsert are ways to manage that. Upsert's kind of interesting. It is a create. It's an update or create is what upsert would mean. So we try to update an existing record if we can find it. If we can't find it, then we create that new record. So we end up using upsert a fair amount. Our integration tools like Zapier, MuleSoft, whatever, some of them will sometimes have upsert visible for us. A lot of times those tools won't display upsert as a capability, even though the API has it, because it's inconsistent, especially around version 4. Email matching with upsert, but we need the CRM ID. Zapier has found it inconsistent, and so they just don't even show us upsert anymore. If you can find an old Zapier account where upsert existed, I very carefully copy those rules and then edit those rules so I still can use the upsert capability, even though it's no longer available in the UI. And our usual create, read, update, delete around that prospect. So this allows us to update a lot of fun stuff. Tags. So tag object allows us to query things that are tagged. And then tags allows us to interact with that actual tag itself. Pardot users, visitors. Visitors in Pardot, the visitor object is basically how we track web browsing activity and stuff like that. And we have an interesting one here called visitor assign. So the Pardot tracking cookie that gets dropped, that is the visitor ID. And we can say, like, this is how Drift will set the known prospect. So we can say, oh, I know this Pardot tracking ID, this cookie number, cookie ID, belongs to this email address. And so we can look up that email address, try to find a prospect ID. If we have a prospect ID, we can use this visitor assign to say this Pardot tracking cookie belongs to this named prospect. And that's a fairly, it's uncommon, but when we use it, it's a very powerful way of making integrations work, websites work. We could do this from Salesforce communities and when people log in and stuff like that. There's a lot of power we can do here. We also have visits, which is individual visits. So you go to the website, you visit it click around for a while, and then you go away for 2-3 days, and you come back. Well, when you come back, you get a new visit. I think it's 30 minutes of inactivity before Pardot will reset that visit for us and create a new visit. And then visitor activities is all the things people do: email opens, email sends. So I spend a lot of time working on the visitor activity object and the prospect object. So two most common prospects that we use with the API. Version 5 docs, these are different. So we allow us to work with campaigns in a different way. External activities, that new external activity feature that just came out in Pardot. This is how we load that. We use this external activity object API integration to send data into this. So this is an API version 5 capability, and we can create activities. It's basically what we can do. We can send a couple fields in, or we match to a couple fields. Kind of have to know exactly what the text string values are. There's no self-discovery built into this API yet. And so external activities is really nice. Files with API version 5, we get the ability to create, read, update, and delete files. So if we need to, migrate files between business units or from production to sandbox, I'll do it this way. Folders, I don't do much API work with folders. Prospects, we got a lot of other things that we see in the version 3, version 4, but there's just more capability with the version 5. And then some new stuff around in the documentation in the last couple of weeks is this Pardot email builder extensibility development guide. So that Pardot lightning builder, the email builder, being able to add capability to that is like one of the things that Pardot's talking about with the roadmaps and stuff like that. This is a documentation on how to work with that capability. I haven't worked with this much myself, but there's the documentation how to do that, and there's some quick start things, links to the trailhead and how to work with that. ISV information if you want to become an integrated system developer. I think, PDO, product development outsource, kind of being more professional resources and being able to provide this to your customers. There's documentation on that, and then some other documentation resources. So it's kind of a flow of how to kind of read the documentation and go into it and know what's there, and being aware that some of these things just don't work, even though the API documentation says, hey, I can create a Pardot prospect account. Well, no, we can't do that. So I see there's some questions that came in. And so can we use the API to integrate Slack and Pardot? So the Pardot API is not something that lives within Pardot and can reach out. We actually have to sit outside of Pardot and kind of reach into Pardot, do what we want to do, pull data out, push data in. So we would need to have, usually the pattern is we have something sit outside of both Pardot and Slack and middleware and just kind of talk to both of them and say, oh, I've got a new prospect and I can push it into Slack. Somebody did something interesting in Slack. I want to update something in Pardot. So we got this middleware piece that kind of talks and brokers between the two of them. That is what we can do for dealing with Slack and Pardot. There are native Slack integration. Pardot Salesforce built Slack capability that's in beta right now, where within like Engagement Studio program, we can say, update Slack with this channel. So it's like the Pardot notify user is what it looks like to me, but it's send a Slack message. You asked about a Pardot API link. So here's the link to the developer docs that I'm looking at right now. I'm also linked to it from within the slide deck, which you'll have available afterwards. MuleSoft is, we had to build our Pardot API infrastructure from scratch. There's no built-in MuleSoft connector for the Pardot API last time I looked. So yes, we can use Pardot API within MuleSoft, but it's not super easy like Zapier is super easy. Now Zapier only gives us access to 7 or 8 of the many dozens of API calls. So we can use these tools. Sometimes we just have to work a little bit harder to use them than we want. And then limitations of the APIs. So yes, there are limitations to the API. Our different levels allow us a finite number of API updates. So we just got to change to the API calls. The bottom tier, there's 3 tiers, bottom, middle, top, right? The bottom tier just got upgraded from 0 API calls to 25,000 API calls a day. The middle tier just got upgraded from 25,000 to 50,000 API calls a day. And then the top tier is 100,000 API calls per day. Very large enterprise I've seen where they've negotiated with Pardot for more than 100,000 API calls, and you basically send a large sum of money to Salesforce, and they will increase your API limits beyond that 100,000. It's rare to need to do this, especially now with the API export. Having multi-million record Pardot organizations used to exceed the API limits. And what with that Pardot API, what used to take, hundreds of thousands of API calls is now the 20-25 API calls with the API export, API import. So we don't see that gross exceeding of the 100,000 limit near as much as we used to. I think that's got us caught up with the questions for now. So, as I mentioned, authentication is the hardest part of working with the API. Getting a computer logged in, it's a pain. So what we end up needing to do is we need to create a login, but we got to create a login in a couple different spots. We need to create a Salesforce user. I recommend using the identity license when we create Salesforce Pardot API users. We get 100 identity user licenses for free with our Pardot.org. Use them for CRM or Pardot API logins. We also have to create that user in Pardot, and that Pardot user's role is what in Pardot is what dictates what the API can use. So if the Pardot API user is set up as a sales role in Pardot, we basically can see just the records that user that integration or that API connector user uses has visibility to, which is probably nothing. So we want to tend to use marketing or admin level for the API user. Sometimes we'll create a custom role to very precisely control what that Pardot API user can use. So that's kind of the normal path. And we can also use a JWT Java Web Token, which is a way of logging in. It's a more programmatic way. It's not friendly for humans to use, but it's easier for the code for a lot of repetitive stuff. And there's also like certificates, HKey signed certificates and stuff like that that can be used. So there's 4 or 5 different ways we can authenticate into Pardot and Salesforce. The certificate one is pretty easy, especially if you got a managed package. Unmanaged package, I should say, that's got that certificate. You can have the org install it. We use that for a lot of our production code. Same with JWTs, we'll use it with the production code. When I'm doing all my just figuring stuff out and audits of orgs and stuff like that, I'll go through the user login process. I would recommend as best practice, each integration, each use of the Pardot API should have its own login. I recommend this for a couple different reasons. It gives a very clear audit history of who did what. So when we have records that we want to, we see the last updated by, we see the name of who updated. So if something's getting damaged in Pardot, we can see who is doing the damage, and we can stop that. We can change the login, we can change the password, something like that. That way we can stop that. And then also by not sharing logins between integrations, if we need to stop one, we don't impact our others. So I'm seeing questions like integrate with Pardot with an external database, like a data lake for reporting, for authentication, right? Those tend to be long-standing processes. I would probably run a JWT or a certificate on those. But we could, and we frequently will see, where we just use a Salesforce user and a Pardot user, and having a special login just for that data lake. That way, if Drift goes crazy and we need to unplug Drift on a Friday night, we don't impact our integration with our data lake, and we don't stop that flow of data. Does that make sense? And then another thing to be aware of is when we're talking to production and development, that is one set of URLs that we need to use. Sandboxes will be a different, actually production and training environments are logins, URLs that we need to use, and then our sandboxes and in dev, we need to use different URLs to access. It's something that's not obvious. It's not really spelled out in the documentation clearly. It's there, and once like you run into this and then you go back and read the documentation more closely, it's like, oh, it's that sentence right there that tells me this. But if you don't know to look for it, you're not going to see it. So creating a Pardot user access, right? Demo. I'm not actually going to create it all the way, but I am going to kind of show where we would do this, because not everybody is a Salesforce admin, and they may not have been in some of these nooks and crannies. The API developer doc has creating authentication and stuff like that. Sucante, we've written a couple blog posts how to do this. I tend to follow the Sucante documentation, and we do have links to JWT logins with Apex and stuff like that, JWT with custom code. So there's other ways that we've got documented that's like not in the Pardot documentation at all that you might find useful. This also will be available in the slide deck, but here's the link in chat if you need it. So like I said, set up the Salesforce user, standard Salesforce user login creation process, right? Set up our Pardot user, same thing we're probably used to seeing. Where it starts getting weird is this Salesforce connected app. And what that will look like is here. So we go into our Salesforce setup, and oh, bummer, this isn't going to let me do side by side. I'll just full screen this. So we go into our setup. So I've logged into Salesforce. We go into setup, and we look at the connected apps. I usually type connected apps. Manage connected apps. So you follow the instructions and it'll tell you exactly what to click. But when we go into connected apps, come on. Live demos are always the best. I can see I have a couple Pardot API things built in here, right? So Salesforce, Pardot to Salesforce integration, secure connected app, that's built in. We don't use that. This, see the little blue icon tells us it's from a managed package that's installed. So this one in blue right now, that's like when we install Pardot into Salesforce org, this one gets built that way. What we've built is this Pardot app. You can see I installed it, I created it, and this is kind of where we go into managing this, edit policies, stuff like that. So what else do we've got? Another place that we can see this is manage connected apps. I was just there. I always have to look this up every single time I'm App Manager. Yeah, here's the other place where we can see it. Pardot, right? So there's like a couple Pardot ones. We don't worry about these, the Lightning, the Classic Mad. We want this managed one. If I click here in the drop down, I can click edit or manage. I'm going to do edit because this will give us the place where we can change some settings. Remember I said the callback URL is different. So in our sandboxes, this will be test.salesforce.com instead of login.salesforce.com. We want to set our Oauth Scopes. This is the magic that allows us to do stuff. So manage Pardot services is the thing that we want to click and then slide over, right? That allows us to connect to Pardot. There's a bunch of other things in here. These allow us the more traditional Salesforce API integrations to Salesforce or other connection capabilities, which are sometimes useful if you know what you're doing and stuff like that, but not for this case. The other thing that we'll want to do in here, Pardot, come on mouse, is if we click manage, this isn't where I want to go. We want to assign the API, this API connector to a profile and our permission set, I should say, and then assign our users that we want to connect to that permission set. So the instructions will say, create an empty permission set, and that's just how we're connecting Pardot API users to being able to use the Pardot API. The other thing we need to do is we need to grab the business unit ID, and where we see that in Salesforce is in setup, and we go to Pardot. We see Pardot setup home. Pardot account setup. And then we have got our business unit ID. And this is the other piece that we need to grab when we do this type of stuff. So that's kind of looking in Salesforce in spots that we may not see normally. My mouse just died. So I get to do the rest of this with the trackpad. So that's setting up the API connections. Let's see, we got a couple more questions. Can we automate the process of migrate to CRM when the prospect's created in Pardot? To auto create a migrate to CRM without clicking the migrate to CRM. So yeah, we can do that in Pardot by API. If we looked at our Pardot prospect data, let's pull up the documentation again. API docs. We're going to go to prospects. And the Pardot name for migrating to CRM is prospect assign. So if the record's not in the CRM and we want that record to be in CRM, we need to do a prospect assign. That's kind of the magic part. It's not obvious that that's what we can call it if you're not familiar with Pardot and Pardot language. Does that answer the question about getting Pardot prospects into CRM? There's other ways we can do that. We can export the prospect data out of Pardot and do like a data loader import, and then Pardot will recognize that, hey, new leads or contacts were created in CRM, matched email address, and Pardot will automatically hook that up. But if we want like a pure Pardot API way of doing this, that prospect assign is the magic that we want to look at. So, talked about the API a lot, but we haven't done anything. So, how to use the API? Fire that up while we're waiting. We can write code, right? Code is like the natural way of working with the API, and we can use an API browsing tool such as Postman. And Postman's kind of like a web browser, but for APIs. I tend to find that I use Postman a lot initially, and then I'll transition over to the more code way. So an intro to Postman. Did it open? It didn't open. All right. So open Postman. You can open this time. Had it all set up before, and then I had to reboot and I lost it. So we gotta bear with me while I get these things logged in again. So Postman. When we go to Postman, you go to like postman.com and look at it. There's like using the web browser. That doesn't work with Pardot. Pardot, we hit a CORS limitation. So we have to download the application, and we have to run the application. Otherwise, it won't work. So Postman is a place where we can do API work. So on the left side, I've got my workspaces, and I've got a couple workspaces collections. The group of API calls is bundled into a package called a collection. And I've got a couple here. So I work with Asana, Marketo. I've got the Pardot API, Marketing Cloud, working with the Salesforce webhooks to flow capability, which is pretty cool. Zoom API, Zoom Info API. So this is kind of the stuff that I do. And if I open one of these up, I can see there's folders and whatnot. And there's a bunch of stuff across the top, the sides I'm not interested. The other kind of interesting thing I'm working with is this on the left side, this environment piece. This is our login credentials. So if we look at like the Pardot API, Salesforce SSO, and we look at that, right? There's a bunch of stuff: username, password, security token, consumer ID, consumer secret. this consumer ID, consumer secret, that's presented to us when we create that connected app. Business unit ID, remember I showed where we can get that business unit ID. That's all stuff here. API version is where we can set our API version. So this is where we set all of our how to talk to Pardot pieces. If you want to see what that can look like, an example API collection could look something like this. This is kind of made up information. This is kind of what that login would look like. I'm going to set to a real configuration. I'm not going to show it because that's got my login details into it. So I've opened up the Pardot API on the side here, and there's a couple folders here. All objects. You notice this looks kind of familiar to our API documentation, right? So I've created all the objects here. I've got this task packages, so exports in here. So this is just the calls to do a common thing, which is an export. We could export visitor activities or prospects or list memberships or list two, right? And then the other thing I have is getting started. I just reorganized that. So I'm going to open up the Get Started, and I notice that there's a login. And I click login, and it came up with a little browser tab here, and it doesn't show much going on. Authentication, just a bunch of stuff going on here, right? And okay, body, there's some stuff filled in, and in these parentheses, these are actually pulling in the variables from my configuration. Pre-request, there's a bunch of tabs here, but how do I do this? There's a button over here that says send. If I click send, it's going to do the work, and it gives me the result here. Error, invalid grant. Authentication failure. Something's wrong. Well, I have two versions of that login. When we do API stuff, we always have to check for errors, especially with code, because weird things happen. I've got the actual correct login, and now I can see, click that send button, and now I've logged in and I've got some stuff coming back. I need to pull these bits and pieces out of this query because we need to pass in the bearer token and stuff like that. You can see this on my screen. You can actually type all that in, and you can actually hijack my login at this point because you see everything I've logged in, and this is the key that allows me to continue. So you can actually log into my dev org right now with this information that's on the screen. So we want to be kind of careful with this stuff. So I'm going to open another query, another in the Getting Started tab. I'm going to get prospects. I'm going to get prospects created in the last 7 days. I'm only going to get a couple fields of the ID, the first name, the email, created at. I'm going to sort these by created. I'm going to sort order. So these are all the options that were listed in Pardot developer docs that we didn't really look at all that closely. And I'm going to click send. And now I get a JSON query result back. We can also change it to XML or, how we want to look at it. I can see that I've got 221 records from the last 7 days. And I've got just the fields that came back. So I got the prospect, and I can see that, this prospect ID is got this email address. I've got a bunch of data. And I get 50 records because I've asked for 50 records here. So the default is normally 200. And then we would have to go through and page through our results. So we got the first 50, and then we would need to add a new section. It's called offset. And I want to offset by 50. And then I query this again. And then I'm going to get, hey, look, different people. So it's the next set of the results. So the next 50 of the 221. If I want to get that third page, I want to do an offset of 100 and send that, and I'll get the next set of data. So we can kind of page through our data using this capability. I can also query visitor activities. And again, kind of this is configured already in the last 7 days and stuff like that. And I can see what people are doing. So I can see that this ID with this visitor ID and this prospect ID has done a type 4, which is a form fill, and has filled out this form with this campaign. Notice it's a numeric campaign and not our CRM campaign number that we want. My campaign name is Shiny New Test Campaign because really creative. We do have the CRM ID here. So we can look that up if we need to. But when we work with the CRM, Pardot campaigns, we do need to use this numeric ID and not the CRM ID. And it shows us when this form fill happened. And not very useful at first because it's got this prospect ID. Well, we can look at the other tab and we can start looking for that prospect ID. But we can also do things a little bit more direct. So I want to grab this prospect ID, copy that. I'm going to scroll down to my prospects. Oh, prospects are most common, so we put that at top. This is a V4 account, I believe. And I want to do a prospect read using the ID. So this is a CRM ID. We can also do a prospect read by email address. We can also do a prospect ID by FID. So this is the foreign ID. This is a CRM ID. I'm going to do a read by ID. I'm going to put my ID value here. And then I'm going to do my API request. And I just went out by API, pulled this data back in. I didn't ask for any fields. I didn't limit fields. I could see all the fields that are available. So I can see that my prospect, this was, my email test 2 prospect record in the CRM, and all the fields that I didn't fill out with that. I'll link to the CRM URL, how long it's been active, just like all the detail. So when I do say with the Pardot API, I like doing exploring. This is the type of stuff I'll sometimes end up doing, exploring like this way. And then, so that's kind of a how to use Postman, how to start playing with the API, and getting work done. So where did I get this bar with all these options? So that is called a Postman collection. And on my work website, Sercante, we have a labs section. And in here, we have Postman collection. So I can click here. So it's Sercante Labs Postman collection. And this is where we can download that collection, that all the queries that I was using. Click run in Postman. It's going to ask Postman for the web. That doesn't work. We want Postman for Windows or Postman for Mac. This is figured out. I'm on a Windows computer, so that's why it's giving me Postman for Windows. You just click this. It will download into Postman. It'll set up this collection. It will also give you an example, the Pardot API Salesforce SSO login. So when you want to start using this, right, you click the little eyeball, you click at it, and that will allow you to work with it. You can also right click, not there. How do we duplicate this? Here we go. Duplicate. So when we are looking at our edits here, we can go into the section here and we want to click duplicate. And that way we can create multiple versions of this. So if we have 2 or 3 different logins that we want to work with, we want, production, we want our sandbox, we want another sandbox, we want our UAT sandbox, stuff like that. We can create multiple logins this way by clicking that duplicate button. And then we could just switch into which ones we want to work with this drop down. Does this help? Is this useful? Have you seen this before? Oh, shut that off. This is kind of the hardest part for me is getting started and knowing how to even interact with the API. I find that this is useful. Another kind of cool trick when we start doing stuff, if we do specific sections, is in here, there's this little code button. And in here, we can actually grab different code libraries. So I use a lot of PHP and Python. I can click on the Python requests. And this will actually give me code that I can copy and paste into my code tool that'll allow me to do this request. We'll need to modify it so it gives the bear, it fills that value in and stuff like that. We'll need to put variables in there when we actually use this in code. But this is another kind of shortcut thing that Postman gives us that I find helpful. So again, Postman's that API web browser. If you want to download Postman, you just go to postman.com/downloads and you can download it. They have a free version and a paid version. I use the free version and it works fine for me. A link to that Circonte Labs Postman collection where you could download that collection and you can get all the stuff built in this year. And then I believe in the Salesforce Pardot docs, they've added a link to a collection in GitHub. So I think Salesforce is maintaining their own version of the collection as well. But I haven't seen or use that yet. Well, there's a demo. So do we have any questions at this point? Do we need to take a short break?
So I think you
We're
have
good?
answered all the questions.
Okay, did I miss any?
No, I feel you have answered every question. Yes, you have answered every question.
All right.
I think we are good and we can carry on.
All right. So break is over. That was a short break. All right. So how to use the Pardot API, right? So we've looked at Postman, that browsing, that exploring, interacting, getting started with the API. I guess the other side that we can work with is code, right? And we can actually write code. So Prakash, other tools I recommend other than Postman, writing code. As far as like easy browsing things, I mean, we can arguably use like Google Chrome and interact with the API that way, but that is way too hard. It's possible, but way too hard to manage the bearer cookies and stuff like that. So Postman's kind of the ideal tool for kind of learning, discovering what the API can do, practicing, troubleshooting, debugging. Like we start writing code and like this API thing just it keeps giving me an error. Well, we can kick back out to Postman, try it in Postman and see, can I get it to work? Oh, I can get it to work in Postman, but it's not working in the code. Why? And we can then do that comparison side by side and say, oh, here's why. My bearer token, I forgot to update the variable in my code for the bearer token, so I wasn't sending the bearer token, and now I can fix that in my code, and the code starts getting work, getting data and stuff like that. So the code path, this is where it gets like anything goes, right? Code needs to run somewhere. When you're figuring things out, learning, just developing that code, you can run it on your computer. You can run it on a dev server. You can run it on a Raspberry Pi. If you've got a Raspberry Pi floating around, right? You can run it on one of these. You could run it on a dev instance on your production server. The code needs to live and run somewhere. When you're going into production, that is, you're not playing with it. It's doing its thing. Heroku is a Salesforce tool. So if you got a Salesforce enterprise account, Heroku is already part of your processing agreements, and it's just a really easy, natural place to start running code. Heroku is designed for app integrations and stuff like that that work with Salesforce and stuff like that. That's where I run most of my code in production, is on Heroku instances. I can talk to half a dozen different Pardot.orgs every 2 minutes on a single Heroku dyno, which is like $25 a month. So it's a pretty cheap place to run code. And then you can get a Heroku dyno for your own org. And like I said, even fairly large orgs, there's a lot of extra room on that Heroku dyno, $25 a month to run the code. It's always up. It's a good place to run code for production. We can also run code in AWS if you're an AWS shop. It can work there. Google Code, Azure, wherever. Those are good places. If you're running really lean, you've got a computer that's always on already, always connected to the internet. That's your web server. 15 years ago, I was that guy running stuff like this on my web server. But web servers, they get hacked too much. And I really don't want this much personally identifiable information flowing through a machine that's as likely to get hacked as not. So I wouldn't recommend a web server, even though it does tick a lot of the boxes otherwise. And it's perfectly capable of running this type of stuff. So a tool I like using is called Jupyter Notebook. It runs on my computer. It's an easy place to start. I've only discovered this tool in the last year, and I've absolutely fallen in love with it. Jupyter Notebook it's programming. It's a programming tool, but it allows us to do Excel-like data processing, and gives us a little bit of reporting as well. Jupyter Notebook is a web-based UI, so it's you look at it in your web browser, which is weird, right? It's this computer program you run on your computer, but you interact with it on a web browser. So it's like two pieces. There's a kernel that we run, and then we interact with that piece that's running on a web browser. We can run the kernel on other computers. There's hosted infrastructure where you can download, or we can run Jupyter Notebook in the cloud. That's for companies, people who are using Jupyter Notebook more for data science, which is what Jupyter Notebook is designed for, is doing a lot of data science work. So it's great for very large data sets and stuff like that. So what we're doing with it with the Pardot API is trivial for this tool. To install Jupyter Notebook, there's a lot of different installation paths. It'll run on Windows, Mac, Linux. There's a command line installation. So on Mac and Linux, you just install Debian zap-get, install Jupyter Notebook. Mac, you could use Homebrew, install Jupyter Labs. Windows subsystem for Linux. If you're running that, you could use the apt-get install Jupyter Notebook that way. If you're a Docker fan, you can find Docker containers and run these within Docker containers. And that's how I've been running this for the most part, is within Docker. I like it because I can spin it up from the Docker component container. use it when I need to use it, and then when I'm done using it, I can shut it down, and it's no longer eating up memory on my computer. There's a VS Code integration that you can use. So if you're familiar with VS Code, Microsoft's Visual Studio Code tool, we can run Jupyter Notebook within VS Code. There's an extension that you get and stuff like that. It's a little bit fiddly to set up. It takes 20 minutes to half an hour to get all the bits and bobs and pip install to get the various Python bits and stuff like that. But it does run. Personally, I don't like it. I've got one client. This is the infrastructure I have to use is VS Code on their hardware. So I do use it this way, but I like the other three versions better. Probably because I'm more familiar with the other ways in VS Code. But if you're familiar with VS Code, that's your tool. You can use it. It does work. You can get work done this way. What I'm going to show is the new desktop app. So the beginning of last month, Jupyter Notebook came out with a new desktop app, which is kind of an all-in-one install thing, and you can download this thing, and it kind of works how we expect it to. I really like that desktop app, and that's what I've switched to when I can. So, quick start, because it's this weird, like it's in the web browser and it's on a command line thing. And starting the app is a little bit weird. So if we're using one of the command line installations, so that's Docker, Linux, terminal and Mac and stuff like that, you need to run the command line to get it started. It will run, it'll spin up a server. It will then give you a couple URLs at the bottom of the startup log. And there's a login token with that. And then that's what you copy and you paste that into your browser, and that will get you to that Jupyter Notebook infrastructure running on your local computer, and then get you authenticated into it. There's other things you can do. You can set up usernames and passwords and permission management and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's more complexity than we need for what we're doing. If you grow into that, great. But don't worry about those details, logins and stuff like that. Getting started, just find that security token URL and paste it into your URL. If you're running a desktop app, VS Code, the one I'm going to show you, you just open the application and do it the way you're used to doing it. A thing to be aware of, the file format. Jupyter Notebook is a weird tool. It's code, it's metadata, it's markdown, it's bits and bobs of data, it's logins, it's all this stuff shoved into a JSON file format. And so we need to be careful when we're saving this and sharing this, because we may accidentally share login details. We may share the actual data, because the way Jupyter Notebook works, it can like display stuff to screen, like your output debug stuff. So we might show that, the prospect email is this and stuff like that. That gets saved into the data file, or the code file, which is it's unusual. We just have to be aware that this is a possibility. And that way we know before we save this to share it, we clear logins if we have logins. We clear that output capability before we save it and share it. That way we're not accidentally leaking customer data and risk a GDPR data breach or something like that, right? It's a cool tool, but it's also kind of a strange one in this regard. So an example with Jupyter Notebook. And again, we could log into this. So the example I'm going to work with is working with deleted prospects. In Pardot, working with deleted prospects is almost impossible with the user interface. I want to do something with a deleted prospect. I can't. I basically have to undelete the prospect, do whatever I need to do, and then redelete it. So if I wanted to zero prospect scores, I have to undelete the prospect from the recycle bin and zero the score and then put it back. Well, it's undeleted. It can sync to CRM. I can accidentally send email. There's a lot of like things that I don't want to have happen if I try to work with deleted prospects by the user interface. With the API, I can actually work with the prospects directly and leave them in the recycle bin. So it's much safer to do stuff with deleted prospects than with the user interface. So I mean, it's things I've done is get a bounce report on the deleted prospects. Looked up which CRM owners own records in the Pardot deleted prospects, so we can ask the CRM owners, hey, do any of these need to be revived out of the recycle bin, and so we can send emails and stuff like that. I've also done zero scoring. So I want like everybody that gets deleted, I want to zero those scores. That way when they do come out of the recycle bin because they filled out a form or something like that, they're not looking that old score of 127. They're now starting at zero again. So there's things that we can do with deleted prospects. And this is just one example, right? And I'm going to start my Jupyter lab. This is the app that I downloaded. Go to jupyter.org and you can download this. As the links on the slide deck how to get this. And of course, there's a demo. There's a new version. Yeah, we're going to skip that for now. I'm going to navigate to a section. So there's a folders and stuff like that in here. You can see I've got some code that I've got running here. I've got menus across the top and stuff like that. I got a launcher, so if I wanted to create a new notebook, that's what the code piece is called, is a notebook. I can pull up a console and stuff like that. I'm going to ignore this for now, and I'm going to look for the code that I've written. Called deleted prospects export, right? And I can open this. And this is what a Jupyter notebook thing looks like. And it's not normal code. If you're familiar with code, it doesn't have header, all this stuff in here. This is why I like this tool. It's much more approachable. It's easier to use. So I can save this. These boxes here, highlighted by the blue, those are called cells. So I can add a cell, copy a cell, do stuff. I can run cells. So when you run a text cell, a markdown cell, it doesn't do much, but you notice it jumped down to the next one. And here I have my configuration. So authentication is hard. There, login information here, right? But if I typed in my login information, then you can see it hijack whatever Pardot login I'm using. So I have a configuration file. There's a question: new to Pardot, not familiar with code, need to have code knowledge to learn Pardot. No, you don't need to have code knowledge to learn Pardot. This is not on any certification test that I've taken thus far. This is like the next level. This is like super geek, Pardot super geek type stuff. So if you're thinking that this session is for your certification tests or something like that, it's not. This is the super hard. This is the next level. This is way beyond. So maybe we should have mentioned that early at the very beginning. If you're thinking, taking this class for this session for certification test prep or something like that, no, not relevant. This is just really geeky. How to, as I call it, bend Pardot to your will. Pardot does a lot of things really well. It's built on assumptions. Sometimes those assumptions aren't aligned with my particular business, whatever problem we're trying to solve. So we need to course correct, adjust, extend Pardot to do the things that we want it to do, just like we would with the Salesforce CRM, with Apex and stuff like that. This is just another way of solving this. So yeah. So code, right? So we got to log in. So there's places we can log in. With the code, I pull in a login piece, so that way I don't have to display it. But if we wanted to, we can just type the values in. This code is available on GitHub. So if you wanted to get started, there's a link to the GitHub page where you can download this code and you can load this and you can use it. So we do the code setup, and I've tried to document my code for people who aren't familiar with coding, so we can see that there's code set up. We want to make sure we have login details, just kind of explaining what's going on with the headers and the text. And we're going to do stuff. So I do have an adjacent library of the actual Pardot API calls, so I can open that up. And you can see I've got close this launcher. I've got the code that I'm running. I've got this library. I'm running everything in Python. This language is Python, and I'm importing a bunch of bits and pieces capability within Python. So to do the Excel-like stuff, that's a Python library called Pandas. To do a lot of the complex math statistics that we want to use, that's a library called NumPy. And creating logins, there's a bunch of code blocks that we need to do. So if I wanted to read an account, that's this read account function, and then we can do this stuff. And this, you can see, has actually got the URL, and it's got the API, and I'm pulling in the API version. The various pieces that we saw within Postman, I've pulled into this as well. We're sending the response, we're getting data, and we're sending that data back to the main piece of code. So it's a code way of interacting with the interaction with the prospect. So I want to do, in this example, I want to create an export of all the prospects in the recycle bin. So going through here, I'm reading the Pardot account data. So grab that Pardot account, and then I am looking for all the years, because Pardot export can only do limits to 1 year at a time, no more than 1 year at a time. So I'm basically seeing how old this Pardot account is, and I'm creating a list of years for one year for every year that the account is old. And then I'm looping through all those years. So if my Pardot account was created in 2019, I'm creating 2019, 2020, 2021 as those numbers, and then I'm looping through those years, and I'm getting a Pardot export for that each year. It's a programmer thing of solving problems and getting all the data, right? Here we see I've got a Pardot API URL. I'm got the API URL in a variable, so we can configure if we want to use the test.pardot.api URL or production API URL. Again, same with the version. I can pass version 3, version 4. I'm creating that export. I'm only grabbing certain fields. These are the fields I'm available in the API documentation. And kind of what the magic happens here is in the arguments section, I'm saying deleted equals true. So this is where I can get just the deleted prospects from using the API. And that's kind of the magic of what makes this particular thing happen. Pass in that login piece that I need to kind of carry to use the login, and getting the data, and then I'm appending the results into a file called export ID, or a variable called export IDs. So if we wanted to run this far, so I've got that login. I want to run this code setup. So I'm pushing the little run button up here. And that runs the code step by step. Config files not run. So I need to run this one. And then, because the error said the config file is not defined, the config file is defined up here. So that means that that wasn't run. So now I want to run this block. And now I can run this block. And it's going through and it's doing its work. And it's done the work. I commented out the print response, so it's not showing me what it's doing. I can rerun that if I wish. And it will get the IDs. Now I want to read the export. So remember, exports are multiple step. I create the exports. It needs to run, and then I need to download the data, right? So here is where I want to run the data, collect this going on. And what I'm doing is the export IDs that I created before, I'm basically looking at each one of those export IDs to see what's going on. And then I'm importing the data. Now, if we notice, I've got a lot of these hash marks, and then these are like green. These are commented out blocks of code. Because a lot of times we're trying to solve problems, we're trying to figure things out. We may need to do different things at different times. So I found that I end up having different things I'm trying to do. I'll build that code, I'll write that code, and then I'll save that for later. And I just comment that piece of code out, and then I'll have a slightly different piece of code to do something slightly different the next time I run it. And I'm lazy. I don't like redoing work. So I just leave it in my code and have different options here. And then we can run this code, and it will give us the exports. It will download files. So I've got the download built into this piece of code. It'll grab that data, and it's showing me here that I've got 30 records and there's 12 fields. I've got a report. So there's some reporting I can do with some code. If you're interested in that, you can grab, look at this code and see what the code does to generate these reports. It's another capability of Jupyter Notebook that's unusual with programming tools. But that's done. And then if I want to save this data, I can write out the data. So I can write out the data. I create a file name. I use the company because I work with different clients. So I read that company name off the Pardot account. Here, I just grab today's date. And then I write a CSV file. So I put in the header. So I just want, the record owner, leads, contacts, and then I just write that data out. And then it's done. So if I wanted to run like all of this start to finish, there's this little button here, this double arrow. I can push run, I can push restart, and it will basically go through and start and run all this data start to finish. So I've done a lot of work, created this tool. It exports, allows me to export stuff that's in the deleted file box, and it will just go through and do the work. And it came up with an error because, of course, it's going to come up with an error because it's a demo. None-type object is not iterable. So this is where learning programming and stuff like that is useful because it allows you to debug this type of stuff. But I know we're beyond time, and I see I'm about to get kicked off this call. Hopefully this was helpful. A way to get started with all of this. That was the last slide.
This was super helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions? So that Mike would be really happy to take them all in case anything is left from your side. Thank you, Mike. This is one of the topics that has never been, I don't think it has been taken in India. Nobody has taken, Pardot APIs. And this was something I was feeling is lacking in India. So thank you so much for accepting the invite and taking up the session. We do see a question. Can we fetch
Yep.
with API?
So Engagement Studio by itself is not currently something we can work with by the API. So we can't create an Engagement Studio by API. We can't read the Engagement Studio steps by API. But a lot of the bits and pieces that go together to compose the Engagement Studio, we can. So we can create and modify the lists that the Engagement Studio will look at. We can read the email templates and that work with Engagement Studio program. The prospects that have gone through it and tags and a lot of the other things outside of Engagement Studio, we can work with API, but not Engagement Studio itself. One of the more clever uses I've done with Jupyter Notebook is actually look at that dynamic content piece in the email templates in an Engagement Studio program, and then pull up the different dynamic content pieces that are being used by those email templates, because I want to make sure that everything's current. And when we have a lot of engagement studios, a lot of complex engagement studios that are sending many dozens of emails, it's very tedious to manually go through and inspect all that, especially trying to make sure we get all the email templates. So by using code to look at every email template that's being used and grabbing the dynamic content, we can actually just gives ourselves a list, a CSV list, and make it a lot easier to reliably make sure that we've checked everything that we need to check. I'm sorry, knows the answer for API with Engagement Studio, but that's where we're at. Was there any other questions?
No, I think you have covered it all. Thank you so much.